Today, I am presenting a little video on the installation of SQL Server 2022 Developer Edition. And this is for computer programming students, any developers out there. This is a version of SQL Server that is free of charge, regardless, as long as you don't go live with a product. This is for development purposes only. So we're going to go ahead and get into it right away. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Microsoft.com/SQL. So Microsoft.com/SQL. And that will bring us to this site right here. This site is the main resource for getting all SQL Server information, resources, development help, everything you need is from here. But for the installation purposes, there's two things we need to install. So both of them are on the download screen. So we're going to go ahead and go downloads. Okay. I click on downloads, and there's two things we're going to install. First thing we're going to do is install SQL Developer right here. And then after we're done installing SQL Developer, we're going to scroll all the way down here and we're going to install SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS. So let's go ahead and install Developer first. So I'm going to click on the download. I'm going to go ahead and save this in my downloads folder. Okay, go ahead and save that. It only takes a few seconds. I'll go ahead and open that. Okay, it wants to get my permissions here that I'm going to allow that to actually install. All right. So I think I opened it twice by accident. That's okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and do this installation. Now we're going to go ahead and do a custom installation. I'm going to walk you through the various details of it and go through. So we're going to go ahead and do custom installation. We can install this anywhere where you want. This program is fairly large, so if you're low on hard drive space on your C drive, then you can move it to a different location, okay? But this is the download location. So I'm going to go ahead and browse this to another folder. I'm going to have this go to my downloads folder, okay? So that's where I'm going to put it in a different folder. I'm going to go ahead and put it, let's go ahead and put it here. I'm going to put it on my D folder, right? I'm going to go ahead and choose install. It's downloading. It is about a gigabyte download, so it will take a couple seconds. I have pretty fast internet here, so you can see it's going pretty quickly. So I shouldn't have to pause the video here. The main thing to understand here is the SQL Server does not have a user interface for development purposes. It only has user interface for administrative purposes. And so we're going to go ahead and install this the way it is. So it's extracting now. We'll give it a second. If it takes too long, I'll fast forward the video to a part where it's on. Okay, there we go. We've got the installation successful. So it is going ahead and starting that installation now. Okay. And so you can see we get a screen here that looks like this, right? So there's a couple things that you can do. You can go ahead and check hardware, software requirements, and there's all kinds of things you can do here, upgrading and installing things. I'm going to go ahead and just go straight to installation, right? So I'm going to click on installation. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on new standalone installation. So we'll go ahead and click on that. It is going ahead and extracting this. Give it a second to do this. There's going to be a series of screens we're going to go through in a minute, which will be different configuration settings. There will also be a password, which we will have to set through this process. All right. So here we go. Here's the setting. All right. So first thing we want to do is we're going to choose the edition we're installing. We are going to install the developer edition, which is a free version, as long as you're not going live with public websites. This is good for development purposes, education purposes, etc. All right. So we're going to go ahead and install a developer. Click next. We're going to agree to that. Of course, we're going to scroll down. We're going to read all of this word for word. We're going to accept it and click next. We're going to go ahead and look for Microsoft Update. It is going to check for updates. All right. I'm going to go ahead and say sure. It should be fine. All right. everything looks good. It does give me a warning that I have a Windows firewall running. Most of the time, this is perfectly fine. You don't need to worry about it. The only time you need to worry about the Windows firewall is if you've done some custom configuration in there. Most people, and especially students, probably have not touched the firewall. All right. So everything looks good there. We're going to go ahead and go next. We are not going to install Azure extension for SQL Server for now. You can install that extension later. It will cause some issues with trying to run things directly on your laptop for now. So we are not going to install that. If you later on do take a cloud-based course or a cloud server course, then you will then add that extension. But for now, we don't need it. All right. So we can just uncheck that box, move on. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install the basics. All right. We do need the database engine services installed. All right. Which will require a few things. We do not need any other things for basic database development purposes. As a programmer or a database developer, these are typically all the tools we need. Later on, in more advanced topics, you may install machine learning or a few other things, but as of for basic programming purposes, the database engine services is all we need. You can change the instance installation directories. Again, this is a fairly large install, so if you are running low on drive on your space on your C drive, you may want to choose another location. But for student purposes of that, I would leave it as the default locations. So I'm going to go ahead and say next. It's now going to allow me to go ahead and do the features. So you can install what are called instances, and you can only install one default instance. Later on, you'll have to do named instances. So you do want to, if this is the only SQL Server installation you have, you do want to do the default installation. If you already have one there, it will require you to do a named instance. But if you can, just go ahead and do the default instance. So don't change anything on this screen. So I go ahead next. Instances are different versions of the servers running in that. Now, this allows us to use some server accounts and what services are going to be running in the background. So these three objects here, we only need the database engine itself running. Okay. So the Microsoft Server Agent, we're going to leave this on manual. And for the SQL browser, we're going to leave this on disabled. So these startup types should be manual, automatic, and disabled. So that means only the database engine will start by default on your computer. If you want to have more advanced control over this, you can set this to manual as well. And that way you'll have to go into your services screen and manually start it every time you want to use SQL Server. But that being said, if you do other things on your computer and you don't want to have the memory or the resources being used 24/7 while your computer's running, you might want to set that to manual. Then when you need to use SQL Server, you'll go ahead into the services and start that. I'll show that again later in the menu in the screen. I'm going to go ahead and set this as manual. If you're really new to computers, you might want to just leave this as automatic. If you do a lot of gaming and those kind of things on your computer, or other high intense things, video editing, gaming, those things, you probably want to set this to manual. All right. So we're going to go ahead and under collation, this is something that you can see that is a collation. You want to leave this alone. All right. We'll talk about collation in a future video. So now we're going to go ahead and do some configuration. By default, it's Windows authentication mode. We want to change this to mixed mode, all right? Because we want to be able to authorize and access the SQL Server from web development from other programs, and it is much easier to do that through SQL authentication. So this will require you to enter in a password, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and enter in a password. This is a password that you do not want to forget, all right? All right, this is a password you do not want to forget. Now, you can use Windows authentication mode in order to access the database. So it's not like some other ones where it's non-recoverable, but This is a password that you should have, that you will not forget. Then what you want to do is under the server administrators here, you want to set add current user. All right, so this will go ahead and add myself. So corresponds to the name of my computer. Clint is obviously my username. And so that user now has authorization of the database. So that's the Windows authentication mode. So I will now have two different accounts in order to access it. I can use my Windows account, or I can use a login with SA and the password that I've entered. Okay. You can go ahead and go through and look at these. You can set where your data directories are. Quite often, you might want your data directory to be not on your C drive, so that if you do wipe out your hard drive and reinstall Windows or something, that your data is at least installed on another drive somewhere. Again, I'm going to leave that the way it is for default purposes, but if you are concerned about rebuilding your computer quite often, which developers do, you might want to change this to a D drive or something like that. These other folders you can pretty much leave as is. There's nothing you need to do in there. We do not need a file stream for Transact SQL. That's a more advanced database administration topic. So main thing, mixed mode, enter a password you will not forget, and make sure you click on add current user so you have access to the database through Windows authentication mode. Next. This now gives you a summary of the installation. You can pause the video, look at my summary here, and yours should be somewhat similar. And then I'm going to click install. All right. This install process will take a little bit of time, so I'll likely fast forward the video here. But in the meantime, this will also depend on how fast your computer is and how fast your hard drives are, how fast your internet connection is. Okay, so you can see that this installation has completed successfully. So before I go ahead and show you the next part, a couple things that if your installation fails, a couple things that you can try is one, turn off any antivirus software that you have. So McAfee, Symantec, those kind of things, make sure those are all turned off. Those can quite often prevent the installation from happening. The other thing is you can try, when you download that installation, you can right click on it and try and run as administrator. That might also help as well. There are several different things that you can try. But as far as that goes, most of you should get to this point where everything says succeeded. You can go ahead and close, and you can see that that's now running. Now, in order for you to actually start the server for it to run, you'll need to go to your services. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to go into your start menu, okay? And you want to type the word services in the start menu, and you'll open the services app, okay? The services app, okay? You'll be able to look through the services. These are the programs that are running on your computer, or programs that are available to run on your computer at any point. And if you scroll down here, you'll get to the point where there's SQL Server running down here. Now you can see there's a few things. There's SQL Server Agent, Browser, the SQL Server CEIP service, and VSS Writer. Now these two here, you do not need them running, all right? So most of the time, these are, again, something you only need for advanced services. So the basic beginner who's just learning this does not need this stuff. So you can go ahead and you can double click on these and you can turn these to manual. Okay. So I'm going to turn these to manual. I'm also going to stop it. Okay. I'll go ahead and stop in these two services. And I'm setting them both to manual. And that way they're turned off. And when you reboot your computer, they will not come back. So, but you'll also notice that this is the main instance of the SQL Server running itself, and you notice it is not running by default because I set mine to manual. If you had set yours to automatic, that should say running beside it, okay? So for people who want to run this as a manual service, every time you reboot your computer, it will not start. So you'll have to manually start it. So you have to go into the services, you right click on it, and you say start. And if all the installation goes, you can see it's now running. Whenever you're done with it, you can either reboot your computer and it will stop it automatically, or you can come into the services, you right click and you stop it. And that's when you're not requiring SQL Server to be running. So those are for people who use the computer for multiple things and they don't want SQL Server slowing their computer down when they don't need it. So I'm going to start that, okay, so that the next part of the installation will run smoothly. Okay, so now that that is running, all right, I'm going to go back to the Microsoft website downloads here, the same website I was on at the beginning. And I'm going to scroll down the bottom and I'm going to download SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. All right. I'm going to scroll down and you want to free download SQL Server Management Studio right here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. You see here, it's under my face, sorry, but the download, I'm going to save this again. I'm going to save this in my downloads folder. Okay. And then I'm going to open that once it's downloading. That's about 600 megabytes. So depending on your internet speed, how long it'll take, there, mine's done. So I'm going to open that. When I open it, it's a second to open because I think it's being scanned. Okay, oops. So you can see here, I get Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio with Azure Data Studio. That's why we're not going to use the Azure part, but we're going to go ahead and do this. So we can go ahead and click install. You can change the location if you want to, not necessary, but we'll go ahead and install. Again, you can see that Windows said, hey, do you want to do this? You have to have administrative permission. Do you want to install it? And I went ahead and said yes. So it just goes ahead. There's no configuration required other than where do you want it installed, and you should just choose the default location anyway. So it's basically just install it. All right. So once it is installed, I will go ahead and show you how you start it and you connect it to SQL Server. In the meantime, remembering that SSMS or SQL Server Management Studio is not a database server. It is the user interface which allows you to interact with the database server. So in order to use SQL Server, you need both the database server running and the user interface to interact with that server. So SQL Server is the database server and SSMS is the user interface to interact with that server. So right now we're installing the user interface. Hopefully it only takes a couple more seconds. Okay, so you can now see that SQL Server Management Studio has been installed successfully. I did pause the video there for a few minutes while it went. It took about, it was only paused for about a minute and it finished. So now as that's installed, we can close that. I'm going to go ahead and close or minimize my browser here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back down to my start menu. And if I go to the search in my start menu here, if I type in SSMS, you should see SQL Server Management Studio 19 here. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. That's going to load up. Go ahead and taking a second. Mind my background here, sorry. All right, so it did load on me full screen here. So you can't see the whole screen, but I'll show you. So first thing is it's going to connect to a server. The server name by default is Coruscant, which is the name of my computer. That's what it's going to go in. You can also do localhost, should also work, but you can just leave this alone. Because I did allow Windows authentication and had the Clint user, I should just be able to connect. If the Windows authentication doesn't work, I can go ahead and use SQL Server authentication. My login would be SA and my password would be the password that I entered before. But I'm just going to stick with Windows authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to connect. And as you can see here, let me resize my screen. As you can see here, it did connect. And so the fact that I have this little green arrow here says that it is connected. All right. If you did not have the service running, the connection would pause. It would pause for about 20 seconds trying to connect, and then it would come up and say connection failed. And that's a good reminder. Oh, I didn't have that SQL Server service running. So then go into your services, start the service, and then it should connect. You can navigate through. Here's your databases. You can see I don't have any databases in here. Let's go ahead and really quickly create a new database. So we're going to go new database. Let's call this test sample. There we go. We've got a test sample database. I can go ahead and just click OK. We now have a database, and we can have tables, views, storage, etc. At this point, I will leave it for a future video in order to how to get a database actually set up that has tables and data and everything in it. But for now, we're up and running. We've got SQL Server installed. We've got SSMS installed. We've successfully created our first database, and we will end the video there. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in the next video.